Okay, everybody. So today we will start a new system, the respiratory system. First, we'll see the parts of the respiratory system. Then we'll talk about the processes of respiration. There are four processes in entire respiration. We'll see what are those four processes, and then we'll talk about the individual parts of the respiratory system. First, we'll talk about the nose. You know that uppermost organ of this system is the nose. So we'll talk about the structure or anatomy of the nose. Then we'll talk about the pharynx, larynx, trachea, and then we'll talk about the lung. Inside the lung, you know that gas exchange takes place, right? Blood goes to the lung to get the oxygen, right? And blood gives carbon dioxide to the lung. That is the exchange. Blood goes to get the oxygen from the lung and gives the carbon dioxide to the lung. And that exchange of gas occurs through the respiratory membrane. So, in one side of that membrane you have the blood, and in the other side you have the alveoli of the lung. And gas exchange occurs between these two compartments, blood and the alveoli, through the respiratory membrane. So we will see the structure of the respiratory membrane through which the gas exchange occurs. Very important structure. Then we will talk about the covering of the lung. You remember your heart has connective tissue covering that is called pericardium. Remember that? Similarly, your lungs are covered by connective tissue membranes. Those are called pleura. So we'll see pleura and its layers. Then we'll talk about the mechanisms of respiration and a chemical that is secreted in the alveoli that is called surfactant. Surfactant is a very important chemical or fluid secreted in the alveoli of the lung, and we'll talk about that. First, the parts or organs of the respiratory system. If you start from the top, first is the nose. Inside the nose you have nasal cavity, okay, and around the nasal cavity you have sinuses. You know, sinuses are the cavities inside the bones. So around the nose you have bony cavities or cavities in the bone. Those are called sinuses. And then next to the nose is the pharynx. Pharynx is a muscular tube-like structure composed of muscles. The next is the larynx. Larynx is also known as voice box. We produce voice by the larynx. That's why it is also called voice box. And it is a tube too, but this tube, larynx, is composed of cartilages and ligaments. So pharynx is a muscular tube, only muscles, but larynx is mainly formed by cartilages. Make sense? And some ligaments. Then next to the larynx is the trachea. Trachea is also known as air tube, and trachea consists of cartilages and muscles together. So you see, pharynx only muscle, larynx mostly cartilages, and trachea cartilages and muscles. Make sense? Now, the lower end of trachea divides into two main or primary bronchi, right and left. And right primary bronchus, remember bronchus is singular. If I indicate one, bronchus. If I indicate two or more, bronchi. Make sense? So, right and left bronchi. Right one enters into the right lung, left primary or main bronchus enters into the left lung. Okay. Then what happens? After the primary bronchus or main bronchus enters into the lung, it divides into many branches, like that tree, big branch, right? Then many small branches come out from the larger branch, right? So like that, inside the lung, you have bronchial tree, many branches, bronchial tree. We'll see how inside the lung the bronchus divides. Just know that bronchi right and left and their branches. Then the last organs are your lungs. You have two lungs, right and left. Inside the lung, you have million of tiny air balls. Those are called alveoli. So inside the lung, you have alveoli, millions. Those are very tiny air balls. Okay. So those are the structures you have in your respiratory system. Here you see those structures I have mentioned. Now, as I have mentioned, primary bronchi or main bronchi are two, right and left. Right primary bronchus enters into right lung, left primary bronchus enters into the left lung, and then they divide. Primary bronchus divides into secondary bronchi inside the lung, and secondary bronchi divide and form tertiary bronchi. So larger two, smaller branches. Then tertiary bronchi divides and form bronchioles, and the terminal bronchioles are the small branches. The diameter of terminal bronchioles is less than half a millimeter, so it's smaller, very narrow, right? Bronchioles are larger than terminal bronchioles, and the diameter is less than 1 millimeter. Okay, so that's how the right and left bronchi, primary bronchi, branch inside the lung. Okay. Now, remember, that's not the end. After terminal bronchial, what happens? From terminal bronchial, we get branches. Those are called respiratory bronchioles. So after terminal bronchioles, then next is the respiratory bronchioles. Okay. Then from respiratory bronchioles, we get further smaller branches. Those are called alveolar ducts. Alveolar ducts. So these are alveolar ducts. This is respiratory bronchiole. Okay. And alveoli, those air balls, tiny air balls, are attached to the alveolar duct. So these are alveoli, small air balls. Okay. Okay. So now let's see again. Trachea divides into right and left primary bronchi. They enter into right and left lung, and then they divide into secondary bronchi, then tertiary bronchi, then bronchioles, then terminal bronchioles, then respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and then the alveoli. So these are last three structures: respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. These three structures are very important. The last three parts: respiratory bronchiole, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. Why these three structures or parts are very important? Because gas exchange occurs only in these three structures. Okay, makes sense? Now the question is then, what is the function of other structures before that? All those structures before the respiratory bronchiole are just to transport the air from outside to inside. Make sense? So they are just to transport passes for the air. But gas exchange occurs where? Only in these last three structures. Okay? So that's why these three are very important. And these three are called gas exchange zone. Okay? And before these three structures, all other structures start from the nose to the terminal bronchiole over there, together called the conducting zone, because only for the passage or transport of gas. That's why from the nose to terminal bronchiole, conducting zone, and from respiratory bronchiole to alveoli, these three structures belong to respiratory zone. So now I can say that entire respiratory tract can be divided into two zones: conducting from the nose to the terminal bronchiole, right? Nose to terminal bronchiole. That is the conducting zone, only for the passage or transport of air. Then last three structures belong to respiratory or gas exchange zone. So respiratory zone is also called gas exchange zone, that consists of respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. Now here you see two lungs and bronchial tree inside the lungs. Now right and left lungs are different, not exactly same. If you see the anatomy or structure, right and left lungs are different anatomically. So how they are different? You see, the right lung is short and broader, wider. So this is right lung, this is left lung. Okay. So right lung is shorter this way. See, right lung is shorter this way, but broader or wider this way. Make sense? Left lung is longer and narrow. Okay. The right lung why right lung is shorter? You know, the liver is here, right? Under the right lung. Your liver is a big organ here. So that developmentally, to give more space to the liver, right? Liver is growing here. So right lung gets shorter. Make sense? Okay. Fissures and deep grooves or cut. Deep grooves or cut. So right lung, if you see the right lung, it has two ducts or deep grooves. So it is divided into three lobes because there are two fissures. Left lung has only, right lung has two fissures. Two fissures. Left lung has only one fissure. Okay. That means what? Since right lung has two fissures, it is divided into three lobes: superior, middle, inferior. Okay. So since it has two fissures, it has three lobes. Since left lung has only one fissure, that's why it has two lobes. Okay, two lobes. What are the fissures in right lung? Upper one is called horizontal fissure because you see the picture, it's like this. So horizontal, makes sense? And lower fissure is oblique, like this. See the right lung there. So upper horizontal, lower oblique. In left side you see only one fissure and it is oblique, like this. Okay. So those are the fissures. Another difference is in right lung there is no cardiac notch. Notch is like U-shaped, like this area. You have seen notch in the bones, right? Notch is U-shaped area. So in right lung there is no cardiac notch, but in left lung you have cardiac notch. Because heart is in the left side mostly, and that notch is formed to give room to the heart. So if I ask you, tell me a few differences between the right and left lungs, you just mention these few things. Should be good. Okay. As I have already mentioned, that the entire respiratory system consists of two zones or divided into two zones. Remember that? Conducting zone from nose to the terminal bronchiole, where only transport or passage of gas, right, occurs. And last three parts belong to the respiratory zone or gas exchange zone. Now we will talk about the nose, which is the uppermost organ of your respiratory system. Nose is divided into two parts. External nose that we can see from outside. What you see from outside? You see outside from this, right? Only this part. And that is the external nose. Inside part has a cavity. That part we don't see from outside. That is the nasal cavity. Only you see what? External nose. This part, right? But you have nasal cavity inside. Functions of your nose. Nose performs a number of interesting functions. One is, always inside the nose is always wet, right? So when you inhale the air, if the air is too dry, if you go to Las Vegas, right, the air is dry and warm, right? But if you go to a cold place like outside in winter, air is cold, right? So air, when it passes through the nasal cavity, since the surface is wet, if the air is dry, it gets a little bit moist, and if the air is cold, it gets slightly warmer. Make sense? So the air that is going into your lung will not be too cold air, will not be too dry air. Make sense? Before it reaches into the lung, it gets wet and warm, which protects your lung, because if it's too cold, then you'll get problems. Number two, filters and cleans the inspired air. You know, the air we inhale could have dust or dirt particles in it, right? And since the surface of nasal cavity is not only wet but sticky, right? Sticky. So many dust particles get trapped, attached to the sticky surface. And inside the nose you have hair. That also helps to block some large dust particles. So two ways your nose cleans the inspired air. One is trapping the dust in sticky surface, number one. Number two, you have hair, right? So hair will block some dust particles. Serves as a resonating chamber for speech. Your nose plays an important role in speech. If I ask you hold your nose, right, and talk, your sound will be different. You all know that, right? When you get cold, someone can tell by listening your sound, right, voice, that you got cold. It's not perfectly, the sound is not produced perfectly. So nose and paranasal sinuses, you remember I said around the nasal cavity you have sinuses inside the bones, frontal sinuses, maxillary sinuses, ethmoidal sinuses inside the nose. Those sinuses help to improve the sound when you speak. Smell and taste. We all know that nose helps to smell, right? Because we have olfactory receptors, olfaction means smell, right? So smell receptors we have inside the nose. That's why you can smell. Is it clear? Because of the receptors. But taste, you also know that nose plays role in tasting the food, to enjoy the taste of food. If you get cold, and when you got cold you eat something, you don't taste exactly how it tastes, right? You know that. It's kind of distorted. So smell plays a very important role in tasting the food. That's why we smell the food before we eat, right? Because if the smell is not good, the taste, you won't enjoy the food. That is called the flavor of the food, right? Taste and smell together is called what? The flavor of that food, right? To enjoy the taste, you need that. So very important. So those are some important functions of your nose. Nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is divided by a partition that is called nasal septum. Now, nasal septum consists of, just you can write it down now, nasal septum consists of bony part and cartilaginous part. So, it has a bony part and a cartilaginous part. We'll talk about that later, just know that it has two parts. Then, nasal concha or concha. From each side of the nasal cavity, three nasal conchae arise like this. You see, these are the lateral walls, right? So from inside the lateral walls, these two walls, three projections go inwards like this, shelf-like structures. Those are called conchae, superior, middle, inferior. Then the roof of the nasal cavity or nose is formed by two bones. Which two bones form the roof of the nose? Here. You see, this is the nasal cavity. So the roof is formed by two bones, sphenoid and ethmoid. Part of sphenoid and ethmoid, those two bones form the roof. Floor of nasal cavity. Floor of nasal cavity is what? you all know this is hard palate, the roof of the mouth, which is actually the floor of nasal cavity. So basically the palate is separating nasal cavity and oral cavity, right? This is the palate. So the roof of oral cavity is the floor of nasal cavity. That is the palate. Okay, hard and soft palates. And then respiratory mucosa is the innermost, is always wet and sticky. Those are few things about the nose. Here you see one side of nasal cavity, so you can see three shelf-like structures or projections. Those are called conchae, superior, middle, inferior, and the conchae are separated by meatus, superior meatus, middle meatus, and inferior meatus. Meatus are actually inward foldings. So conchae are the projections. So if this is the lateral wall, one side lateral wall of your nose, three projections. These are conchae, superior, middle, inferior, and these are the meatuses. Okay, so three conchae, three meatuses. Here you see the roof of nasal cavity in the top part. Above those conchae, you see part of sphenoid and ethmoid. Now, I believe some of you still remember that when you saw the skull in NP1, you saw olfactory foramina, tiny holes. Anybody remember? Many tiny holes, olfactory foramina in cribriform plate of ethmoid, through which olfactory nerve fibers pass. So, from the nose, olfactory nerve fibers that take the smell signal to the brain pass through the cribriform plate of ethmoid. You see the top left, cribriform plate of ethmoid. So, in the roof of the nasal cavity, we have the cribriform plate of ethmoid, in which there are many tiny holes. So, from the nose, olfactory nerve fibers take the smell signal to the brain through those fibers. Okay. Now, sometimes what can happen, if anything hits your head, like accident happens, like you get hit in your head or front of the nose or head, what can happen, these are the olfactory foramina and these are the olfactory nerve fibers passing through the olfactory foramina. If something hits the head, that can move the cribriform plate this way, ethmoid bone, and that can cause crash or damage of the olfactory nerve fibers passing through those olfactory foramina, and that will cause anosmia, the condition. No smell, because olfactory nerve fibers are damaged, can't carry the signal from the nose to the brain. Make sense? So that will cause absence of smell perception in that person. Anyway, now floor of the nasal cavity you see here, that is the palate. Front part of the palate is bony part, that is the hard palate, and back part is the muscular part, that is the soft palate. So soft palate in the back and hard palate in the front. And the free end of the soft palate is called uvula. That you can see if you open your mouth, open, big, and look through, you can see something is hanging like this. That is the uvula or end of the soft palate. So that is the floor of nasal cavity or roof of oral cavity or mouth. Okay. The mucosa of nasal cavity has what kind of epithelial lining? Pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Remember, in upper part of the respiratory tract, you have pseudostratified columnar. Why? Because you all know that pseudostratified columnar cells have cilia. That's why it is also called pseudostratified ciliated columnar, because of cilia, hair-like, soft hair-like structures, cilia. And in your upper respiratory organs, you have ciliated columnar. And those cilia help to push the mucus towards the throat. So you know, always secretion of mucus is occurring inside the nose, and that mucus must be pushed away backwards towards the throat. And the cilia are working like broom, soft broom. When many cilia move at the same time in same direction, that creates a lot of pressure like this to push the mucus, secreted mucus. Make sense? And that's how your nose stays clean all the time. The secretion, two types of secretion occurs in the nasal cavity: mucus and serous secretion. And the secretion contains lysozyme and defensins. These chemicals have bactericidal action, can kill the bacteria or microorganisms. Okay, so that way the microorganisms, many microorganisms will be inactivated or killed. In the mucosa, you have plenty of capillaries and nerve plexuses. Now, see two things. You have plenty of capillaries, that means a lot of blood is flowing there. Make sense? More capillaries, more blood flow. And that keeps the nasal cavity warm, because you know already that blood is slightly warmer than the body temperature. You remember that? When we talked about the blood is what? Slightly warmer. So, if more blood flows somewhere, that area will be warmer. Make sense? So, always more blood is flowing in the respiratory mucosa inside the nasal cavity. That means that area is always warmer than your body. And that's how, you remember a few minutes ago I told you that if the air is too cold, when it passes through the nasal cavity, it becomes warm, right? So that's how the inspired cold air becomes slightly warmer. Make sense? Because inside the nasal cavity, always more blood is flowing and keeping it warmer. Number two, plenty of nerve endings are there. That makes the surface highly sensitive, because if you have more nerve, that area is more sensitive. And because of that high sensitivity of the surface of the nasal cavity, even if small particle, touches the surface, then what happens? Signal goes to the brain and you sneeze. You know that, right? If you smell something strong, you get sneeze. If you smell chemical, right, or gasoline, you can tell that. Signal quickly goes to the brain, right? That's because high sensitivity of your nasal cavity surface. Why it is highly sensitive? Because of more nerve endings. And sneezing is a very good protection, because if any harmful things try to enter into your lung through the nasal cavity, before it enters into the lung, you will sneeze and push it out, right? So that is a good protection. Okay, so that's all about the nose. Now, there are 4 processes in inter-respiration. What are those 4 processes? Pulmonary ventilation is number 1. Then external respiration, transport of gases, and internal respiration. So those are the 4 processes of respiration. Now let me briefly tell you what are those 4 processes. Pulmonary ventilation is very simple. What is that? Breathing. So pulmonary ventilation is breathing. Now you tell me, breathing has how many phases? When you breathe, just think simple. When you breathe, you do 2 things, right? 2. That means you intake or inspire the air and expire the air, right? So inspiration and expiration. Make sense? So those are pulmonary ventilation. Breathing. Inspiration, expiration. That part you can tell from outside by looking at somebody. You can tell he's inhaling the air, exhaling the air, right? You can tell. Other 3 processes happen inside the body that you can see from outside. You can tell from outside. What are those? External respiration. After the air enters into the lung, gas exchange occurs inside the lung. Just write it down. Pulmonary ventilation is what? In one word I said, breathing, right? External respiration is what? Gas exchange in the lung. That's the external respiration. Gas exchange where? In the lung. Is it clear? Transport. Blood transports oxygen and carbon dioxide. Make sense? So blood performs this part, this process. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported by whom? By the blood. Is it clear? Then internal respiration, the last process. Just write it down. Exchange of gas in the tissue. Exchange of gas in where? The tissue. So very simple. Now let me just repeat again. How many processes in respiration? Enter respiration? 4. Pulmonary ventilation is what? Breathing, right? Inspiration and expiration, or inhalation, exhalation. Then next is external respiration. Gas exchange where? The lung. Is it clear? Then transport. Who transports? Blood, right? And last is internal respiration. Gas exchange where? In the tissue. Is it clear? Okay. Now you tell me, very simple, all of you know. Why blood goes to the lungs? To get the oxygen, right? So now we know what happens inside the lung. Blood gets oxygen from the lung. Is it clear? And always remember, this is important, that carbon dioxide goes to opposite direction of oxygen. Now you tell me, blood gets oxygen from the lung, right? So carbon dioxide goes from the blood to the lung. Is it clear? Because oxygen goes from the lung to the blood. Blood is getting oxygen. So carbon dioxide will go where? In opposite direction. That means from the blood to the lung. Then we exhale the carbon dioxide out. Is it clear? So that's what happened in external respiration. Blood gets oxygen from the lung and gives carbon dioxide to the lung. Always opposite. Blood and oxygen and carbon dioxide always in opposite direction. Now, you tell me internal respiration occurs in the tissue. You all know this one too. Blood goes to the tissue to give what? Oxygen or carbon dioxide? Tissue needs what? You all know that, right? Tissue needs what? Oxygen, because carbon dioxide is toxic. Tissue gets oxygen from the blood and blood gets carbon dioxide from the tissue. Makes sense? Because opposite. So that is the internal respiration. First two occur in the respiratory system, because breathing is a function of respiratory system. External respiration occurs in the lung, you already know. So these two things happen in the respiratory system. Now transport. Who transports? Blood, right? And blood is a part of what? Cardiovascular system, we know that. And in the tissue, what happens? Gas exchange occurs between the blood and the tissue, right? No respiratory system is there. Blood and the tissue. That means capillary and the tissue. So that's also capillary wall, circulatory system. Okay. Now, if you see the next organ after the nose, next organ is the pharynx, which is a muscular tube, I have mentioned already. Pharynx has three parts. Uppermost part is called the nasopharynx, middle part is oropharynx, and lowermost part is the laryngopharynx. Nasopharynx is behind the nasal cavity. Make sense? So that's why it is naso. Oropharynx is behind the oral cavity, and laryngopharynx is the last part. That is the lowest part, and from there the lower end of the pharynx, the larynx starts. That's why that last part is the laryngopharynx, because after that larynx starts. So those are three parts. You see here by three different colors they have shown that. Now roughly, if there is no actually, we have divided the pharynx into three parts, but there is no anatomical demarcation that from where to where is naso, where to where is oro. The best way to say is the uvula. Above the uvula is nasopharynx, below the uvula is oropharynx. That is the separation between naso and oro. That's the one way we can tell. Nasopharynx is posterior to the nasal cavity that I have mentioned. Lining is again pseudostratified ciliated columnar. I have mentioned upper respiratory tract as pseudostratified ciliated. Pharyngeal tonsil, which is also called adenoids or adenoid tonsil, attached to the posterior wall of nasopharynx. Let's see here. You see here, if you look here, this is the pharyngeal tonsil attached to the posterior wall of nasopharynx. And another important structure is there, that is the opening of a tube. That tube is called auditory tube that connects the middle ear here and the nasopharynx. Goes like this, from the ear to the nose. Also called pharyngotympanic tube. Also called eustachian tube. So it has three names: auditory tube, pharyngotympanic tube, or eustachian tube. So that tube connects the middle ear to the nasopharynx like this. And you know that infants or small kids, they suffer from ear infection, right? Many of them frequent ear infection. Adults don't. Why? Because the tube is much shorter, right? Because the head is short in infants. So the length of tube is short, makes sense? And this way it's more vertical because then everything is closed. So short as well as vertical. As the head grows, the tube gets longer and more sorry, in infants more horizontal, in adults gets more vertical and longer. So in infants the tube is short as well as what? Horizontal, like this. So what can happen? Fluid from the nasal cavity can easily go to the ear. Makes sense? Because it is short and placed like this, horizontal. The fluid can go from here to here easily. And that's the reason why the infants or small kids, they get frequent ear infection. Make sense? Because of distance. As the head grows, the tube gets longer and more vertical like this. So the fluid cannot easily go from nasal cavity to ear cavity. Okay. So that's the nasopharynx. Adenoidectomy is the surgical removal of pharyngeal tonsil. So pharyngeal tonsil is sometimes removed surgically, that is the adenoidectomy. But remember, there is another term that is called adenectomy. That is different. This is removal of any gland of your body. Adenectomy is removal of what? Any gland in your body. But adenoidectomy is the removal of pharyngeal tonsil. Sometimes infection can cause inflammation of the tonsils, and the tonsils can become very painful, right? And enlarge, swelling. In that case, if it happens frequently and becomes chronic, in that case we prefer to remove that tonsil, because we talked about it in lymphatic system. When we talked about that, we have many lymphoid organs in the body, right? Like spleen, thymus, other tonsils, right? So removal of one or two will not cause big problem. Is it clear? Remember, in the wall of the intestine you have the Peyer's patches, many aggregated lymphoid follicles, right? You have many lymph nodes distributed throughout the lymphatic system, right? All those are working for immunity. So removal of one or two will not cause problem. Oropharynx is the second part of the pharynx, and this oropharynx and laryngopharynx, the last two parts of pharynx, are common passages for both the food and the air. But nasopharynx is only for the air. Now, the lining of oropharynx, remember here, you have to remember it, is not pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Why? Because remember, when the food passes through this structure, friction can occur, right? Because food is kind of semi-solid. Air is not. Air will not cause friction, right? But food, when food will pass through it, will cause friction. And I mentioned before, the areas in your body where the chance of friction is high, you have what kind of lining? Stratified squamous. Make sense? So since food is passing through these last two parts of the pharynx, the lining is not ciliated columnar but stratified squamous because of friction. Palatine tonsils in the lateral wall of oropharynx, and lingual tonsils on the posterior surface of the tongue. So you see there are three types of tonsils, right? And the tonsils are located around the very upper respiratory tract or mouth. And what are the three types of tonsils? Palatine tonsils close to the palate, lingual tonsils, lingual means tongue, right? So in the back part of the tongue, and pharyngeal tonsil in the nasopharynx. So those are the tonsils. Pharyngeal tonsil is one, lingual and palatine are paired too. Okay. Here in this picture you can see the pharyngeal tonsil attached to the posterior wall of nasopharynx that I showed you before. Now you see palatine tonsil. You see the soft palate, so near the end of the soft palate, that's why palatine. And lingual in the back of the tongue. Lingual means tongue. So those are the tonsils. Larynx, which is also known as voice box that I have mentioned, formed by mainly cartilages that I also mentioned before, and few ligaments. So all the cartilages are hyaline type cartilage except the epiglottis. Epiglottis of larynx is an elastic cartilage. So just remember, all respiratory cartilages are hyaline except the epiglottis, which is elastic cartilage. Epiglottis starts with E, so remember E, elastic epiglottis. All others are what? Hyaline cartilage. Now, what are the cartilages that form the larynx? The largest single cartilage is the thyroid, that is also called Adam's apple in male. This cartilage is larger in adult male than female, right? You know that, Adam's apple. Why? Because this is interesting, that this cartilage is sensitive to testosterone, the male sex hormone. When the male sex hormone is released in the body at puberty, suddenly this cartilage gets enlarged, bigger, and that causes the prominence of larynx, laryngeal prominence or Adam's apple. Another single cartilage is the cricoid. So just below the thyroid you have cricoid cartilage, and this is the second larger. These are single, one in number. You have small paired cartilages. There are two in number. What are the paired cartilages? Arytenoid, cuneiform, and corniculate. Those are smaller but paired, two in number. So those are the cartilages that form the larynx. Epiglottis is very important. Why? Because it closes the laryngeal inlet during swallowing of the food. You all know that when you swallow the food, food must not go to the respiratory tract, right? If it does, then it will go to the lung, right? That will be dangerous, can kill the person. So food should not enter into the larynx, and this epiglottis, you see here, this is the laryngeal inlet entrance, and this is the epiglottis. So when you breathe, it is open, right? So air will get in. Is it clear? But when you swallow the food, it should move down to close this, because food should go to the esophagus, not here. Okay? So very important function. And since it moves like this, now you can think why it is elastic cartilage. Because elastic cartilage has more elasticity, right? Can move easily. Here you see the thyroid cartilage, the largest one, and below that you see the cricoid cartilage, second larger. The paired tiny cartilages are in the back, so we don't see here, but we will see if you look the back part of the larynx, you will see that. Now here you can see largest is the thyroid, and second larger is the cricoid, and those are single. And paired are in the back. We will see that later. Just see the membrane or ligaments here. The membrane between the hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage is called thyrohyoid. We are starting from the lower structure, thyrohyoid, between thyroid cartilage and hyoid bone. And now see, below the thyroid cartilage, you have a ligament that is called cricothyroid. Makes sense because cricoid cartilage below and thyroid cartilage above. So, cricothyroid ligament. Here you can see the small paired cartilages, cuneiform, corniculate and arytenoid. Those are small cartilages. Now inside the larynx you have vocal folds. Vocal folds are, you see, two types of vocal folds. You have upper one is vestibular, which is also called false vocal fold, and lower one is the true vocal fold, and lower one is responsible for the production of sound. Lower one is the vocal fold, true vocal fold. Upper one is called vestibular fold, okay, which is false vocal cord. In the other side you have same. So basically like this, you see, here you are seeing one half, one side. That's why you see one here, another below it like this, right? But the other side you have like this. So basically you have like this and this. Make sense? Now if I make half, you see one side. So when we produce sound, we first adjust the vocal cord. How, you know, would we make low frequency sound or high frequency sound? Depending on that, we adjust the vocal cords. Anyway, so just know that we have two pairs of folds there. Here you see in the left side the vocal folds there is are closed, so there is no space in between the vocal folds, no opening is left, but in the right side you see the opening is there. That opening between the two vocal folds is called glottis. So glottis is the opening, and the size of that opening or glottis changes when we produce sound. If you see, if you go to YouTube, you will be able to see. Someone, you know, can take the picture how the glottis, the size of the glottis is changing when you are speaking very fast, you know, and changing like this. So the frequency of sound is also changed. Trachea. Trachea is the air tube. It has cartilages in the front and muscle in the back. The cartilages are C-shaped cartilages, not complete circle, C-shaped cartilages, and so these are the cartilages in the trachea, and in the back part you have the muscle. So basically the posterior part of the trachea is a muscle and the front part is cartilage. This is muscle, this is cartilage. If you make a cross section of trachea, like if this is the trachea, if you make a cross section and see the layers in the wall, there are three layers from inside to outside: mucosa, submucosa and adventitia. Mucosa has epithelial lining, that is pseudostratified ciliated columnar. I mentioned, remember that upper respiratory tract is pseudostratified ciliated columnar, right? Except which parts? Where the food passes, right? That is stratified scones because friction, remember. Where the air passes, pseudostratified ciliated. Make sense? So trachea is for air only, so pseudostratified ciliated. And you have secretory cells in the mucosa. Two types of cells, serous and mucus. I'm sorry. In the mucosa, you have only one, that is goblet cells. These cells secrete mucus, goblet cells. In submucosa, that is the middle layer, you have two types of cells, serous and mucus. Together we say seromucous glands. Those cells are together called seromucous glands. Serous cells secrete water-like secretion and mucus cells secrete thick secretion, mucus, sticky. And outermost layer is adventitia, and the cartilages, C-shaped cartilages, are located in this layer, outermost layer. So those are three layers from inside to outside: mucosa, submucosa, and adventitia. In the back, you have trachealis muscle that I mentioned, the posterior part. Now, the last piece of cartilage is called carina, which is not a C-shaped. All other cartilages are C-shaped except the last piece, which is V-shaped cartilage, that is called carina. And since this is the last piece of cartilage, that means this is the lower end of the trachea, from where the primary, right and left primary bronchi start and enter into the lung. Right one to right lung, left one to left lung. Here you see those three layers. You see mucosa, ciliated columnar, you see the cilia, you can see if you look carefully. You see the middle layer, that's the submucosa, you can see seromucous glands, and outer adventitia has the hyaline cartilage, C-shaped. Now in the back you see the trachealis muscle, and behind the trachea we all know that we have the esophagus. So trachea is for air, esophagus is for food. Trachea is in the front and esophagus is in the back. This is the histology, same thing. You see three layers. Goblet cells, you remember in mucosa, you have goblet cells. These are the goblet cells. You see the kind of whitish. This is hyaline cartilage. Okay. See the cilia. Okay. Now you must remember, I mentioned at the beginning that entire respiratory system is divided into two parts or zones. Upper part is the conducting zone, only for the passage of air, and lower three structures together form the respiratory zone or gas exchange zone. Here you see those three structures I already showed you at the very beginning today. Now alveoli. Alveoli contains air. You all know that, air balls. So this is the alveolus. Air is inside that. And interestingly, you see how beautifully the structure inside the lung is designed. Inside the lung you have million of alveoli, and each alveolus has capillary bed on the surface. So how beautifully, how microscopically everything is designed so nicely. So you see here on the surface of each alveolus you have the capillaries. So now if I draw here, this is one alveolus and this is a capillary. Okay, this is the capillary. So here you have blood. We know that inside the capillary we have blood. Let me draw this on. Yes. So this is the capillary. So inside the capillary you have blood, and this is the alveolus. So you have the air. Now we know that blood goes to the lung to get the oxygen, right? To get the oxygen. So blood gets oxygen from the alveolus. And I mentioned carbon dioxide always do what? Moves in opposite, right? That means blood gives carbon dioxide to the alveolus. So carbon dioxide from blood to the alveolus, oxygen from the alveolus to the blood. So blood is getting oxygen. And that is the external respiration I mentioned, what happens in the lung. Now, the gas exchange occurs through this membrane, right? Occurs through that membrane. Now you tell me, this membrane consists of which two walls? Wall of what? What is this? Alveolus. And the wall of what? Capillary. Make sense? Because this is alveolus, this is capillary, right? So these two walls are attached to each other, so through which the gas exchange occurs. So basically that is the respiratory membrane. So respiratory membrane is the structure formed by what? Two walls. Which two walls? Capillary wall and alveolar wall. Is it clear? Two walls, right? So two walls are attached to each other like this, and that is the respiratory membrane. So respiratory membrane is the structure, yes. Yes. Right, right. So blood goes, just think simple, why blood goes to the lung? To get the oxygen, right? So blood will get the oxygen. And I said carbon dioxide always in opposite. So that's, okay. So that's the respiratory membrane. Now, in the wall of the alveolus, you have three types of cells. Most of the cells are simple squamous. So that's the most common type of cells that form the alveolar wall. Simple squamous. Also, you have some surfactant secreting cells. Those cells do what? Its name is telling you. Surfactant secreting cells. Secrete what? Surfactant, which is a fluid or chemical that I have mentioned. Very important. We will talk about that. And another type of cells, they engulf the antigens, macrophages. So those are three types of cells. Simple squamous are called type 1 cells because that's the most common type. Type 1 cells are simple squamous. Type 2 cells are surfactant secreting cells. Is it clear? And macrophages. So those are three types of cells. Now the question is, what is surfactant? Surfactant is a fluid, or you can say a chemical that lines like this along the inner surface of the alveolar wall. So this is surfactant. That fluid lines in the inner surface of the alveolar wall and keeps the alveoli open. Keeps the alveoli what? Open. If the surfactant is not there, what will happen? The alveoli will collapse, will squeeze. It is very important to keep the alveoli open, and surfactant does that. The last thing I will mention, I don't know if you have heard, there is a clinical condition that is called infant respiratory distress syndrome, IRDS, due to lack of surfactant secreting cells. If the surfactant is not secreted, what happens? I said alveoli will do what? Collapse, right? And that happens in this clinical condition. This happens in infants if someone born without surfactant secreting cells or lack of surfactant secreting cells. Make sense? It could be due to genetic disorder. If that's due to genetic disorder, it's almost impossible to fix because their stem cells will not produce that cells. Is it clear? So these infants usually die. But if due to premature birth, the surfactant secreting cells are not matured enough to secrete, but when they will get matured, they will secrete. Is it clear? So in that condition, the infants will survive if you take care. After premature birth, if you take care of that infant, when the surfactant secreting cells will get mature, will start to secrete surfactant, then the alveoli will open. Okay, so let's stop here.